In the seemingly endless length of time since the end of Avengers Infinity War and the beginning of Endgame, it felt like we had exhausted every prediction possible. But we have to hand it to Marvel Studios, because they still managed to shock us with all of the crazy and unexpected moments we saw in Endgame. Check out our list of things that surprised even us, and see if you managed to predict any of them. We made no shortage of predictions involving Avengers Endgame, and we pretty much had to put them into two categories: things we reasonably expected to see, and things on our comic book fan wish list. One of the things we beyond hoped for was Captain America wielding Mjolnir, which seemed kinda crazy since it was destroyed during Thor Ragnarok. But thanks to some time-traveling shenanigans, it ended up in the present-day MCU, and Steve Rogers totally wielded it just like the God of Thunder himself. Not only did this make an epic battle scene all the more amazing, but it was a stark contrast to the last time we saw Steve trying to pick up the legendary Uru weapon. During Avengers Age of Ultron, we saw him try to lift it unsuccessfully, yet in Endgame, he was swinging it around like a total pro. One of the big questions we had following the end of Infinity War was, where the heck was Hawkeye? Sure, we know Clint Barton ended up getting grounded during Captain America Civil War, but come on! Was he really going to let a little thing like an ankle monitor stand between him and saving half of all life in the universe? But when we saw the trailers for Endgame, we got super excited for the new sword-wielding Clint Barton. Less excited for his mohawk and casual tank top use, but we're not going to get into that right now. Comic book fans were excited to see Clint's darker, edgier alter ego Ronan in the MCU. But there's just one small problem. Nobody ever actually called him Ronan. None of his friends, even Clint himself. The word Ronan is never uttered in the movie. This seems like a strange thing to leave out, especially since we were all expecting it. During one of the many trailers for Avengers Endgame, we learned an interesting bit of information. Natasha Romanoff stated that Thanos had used the Infinity Gauntlet one additional time following the decimation, because apparently they have Infinity Stone tracking software available at Avengers headquarters. Nebula claimed to know where Thanos was, but could only recall the garden, which wasn't very helpful. Sorry, Nebula, but we all really wanted to know what Thanos used his second Infinity Wish on. It turns out his second wish was to get rid of the Infinity Stones entirely. It very nearly got rid of Thanos himself, of course, but he said it was to remove the temptation to use them again. We aren't sure whether he meant solely for himself or for other people who might come after them and disrupt his farming, but they were definitely destroyed. Going into Avengers Endgame, there was a rumor that all of the footage from the trailer was taken from the first half hour or so of the movie. When questioned about this, Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige called the rumor somewhat accurate, which in most people's minds translated to absolutely 100% the truth. So with that in mind, we were pretty darn surprised to see Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man facing off against Thanos so soon in the movie. Well, as we all know, the trailer footage wasn't solely from the beginning of the film, but our heroes did indeed end up facing Thanos much sooner than we thought. They pretty much go right to him, and when they find him, well, let's just say Thor aims for the head this time. I can't believe we just saw that in a Disney movie. Maybe there's hope for more R-rated superhero movies after all. Becoming one of the biggest stars in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is no easy task. Chris Evans claims that when he first started getting in shape to play Captain America, he actually threw up as a result of exercising so vigorously. Chris Hemsworth also had to get shredded to play the God of Thunder, but apparently he got to take it easy in preparation for Endgame. That's because Thor showed up rocking a big old beer belly, probably as a result of the many kegs of beer he drank. We have to say we definitely didn't anticipate seeing Thor Odinson walking around with his gut hanging out, yelling at kids on Fortnite. Yeah, it's clear we were really out of our element when it came to predicting what was going to go down with the God of Thunder. As far as MCU movies go, most people consider Thor and Thor the Dark World to be pretty unremarkable entries. They're not terrible by any means, but they don't hold up to some of the finer films in the MCU library. Still, when Frigga died, it was pretty heartbreaking. Even Loki got emotional about it. We didn't expect to see Frigga again, especially in such a prominent role. Natalie Portman, who played Jane Foster, was at the Endgame premiere, causing many fans to wonder if her character was returning to the MCU. But instead, we got a brief glimpse of Jane Foster in a sweet scene with Thor reunited with his beloved mother. Everybody knows Disney now has access to the Fox library of characters, a switch which made comic book fans understandably nervous. It's no secret that the House of Mouse capitalizes on being family-friendly, and many felt that this would be incompatible with the often violent world of superheroes. But it seems like Disney and Marvel struck a harmonious PG-13 balance which made both sides happy. But it really seemed like Endgame pushed the limits of what it means to be family-friendly. There were several dramatic cuss words uttered at various points in the movie, along with a casual decapitation and a guy bleeding out after an interaction with Clint Barton. This actually gives us some hope for the future of the Deadpool franchise if the Merc with the Mouth ever joins the MCU. When the movie Captain Marvel was announced, we were assured that Captain Marvel was going to be the strongest hero the MCU had ever seen, which would have made sense if we actually got to see her during Avengers Endgame. Yeah, she showed up to rescue Tony Stark and Nebula, and she was there during the final battle against Thanos, but the rest of the time she was totally missing in action. We were excited to see her interacting with other great Marvel heroes and establishing a brand new group dynamic which would carry over into Phase 4. But instead, we got a weak excuse about there being trouble elsewhere in the galaxy, and that's about it. It really seems like Marvel Studios was hedging their bets on whether Captain Marvel would be a hit, so they didn't include her much in Endgame just to be safe. But considering her movie made over $1 billion, we have a feeling we'll see her in the MCU again very soon. When we first met Nebula in Guardians of the Galaxy, she was unequivocally a villain. Although her sister Gamora tried to bring her over to the light side, Nebula was still understandably hung up on their traumatic childhood. While they eventually made peace with one another, Nebula didn't really have the same sort of virtuous motivations that many other characters do. In fact, other than destroying Thanos, we weren't sure what Nebula wanted out of life. So it was a pleasant surprise when we saw a kinder, gentler Nebula in Endgame. Well, kinder and gentler than what we were used to at least. If you watched Infinity War, you probably noticed that the concept of sacrifice came up a lot. It seemed like barely a moment passed without someone giving up something or a character talking about the importance of giving things up for the sake of others. So it definitely wasn't a surprise that someone had to be sacrificed at some point in Endgame. But it was surprising who ended up losing their life. We had predicted that someone would have to perish in order to obtain the Soul Stone, but older Avengers like Tony Stark and Steve Rogers seemed like safe bets. Yet it was ultimately Natasha Romanoff who sacrificed herself to save the day, which was both shocking and heartbreaking. Well, it looks like the Black Widow standalone movie is definitely going to be a prequel after all, or at least we hope so. Speaking of heroes we thought would end up being sacrificed to save the day, we have Steve Rogers. We saw him try to give his own life to save others in Captain America: The First Avenger, but he really just ended up taking a long nap to save others. Somehow that just doesn't sound as heroic. So when it came time to guess who was going to take one for the team in Endgame, Steve Rogers definitely seemed like a safe bet. Except that he didn't sacrifice himself at all. He took a leisurely jaunt back in time so he could live out his life smooching his one true love, Peggy Carter, instead of her great niece, Sharon Carter. Yeah, we're not sure how that one works out either. In Game of Thrones, there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and in the MCU, there must always be a Captain America. We had a feeling Steve Rogers wasn't going to be carrying on the title, mostly because we thought he wasn't going to survive. But this begged the question of who would be the new Captain America. He's more than just a guy who throws a shield around. He's an icon who represents certain ideals and brings a specific set of morality to the Avengers. In the comic books, many characters have taken on the mantle of Captain America, including Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson. We had a feeling Steve would pass on the shield to someone else, but we didn't think it was going to be Falcon. For one, he's not a very prominent MCU hero, and he and Steve hardly have the adorable best friendship that Steve and Bucky have. Yet, despite these issues, Sam is the new Captain America, and we're definitely excited about seeing him take on the role. Ever since Thor Ragnarok came out, fans have been predicting we'd see Professor Hulk in the MCU. Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk have been at odds for so long, and in that movie it became clear that the MCU version of Hulk is more than just a thoughtless smashing machine. In the comic books, Professor Hulk is a fusion of the brilliant Bruce Banner and the super strong Hulk, and we were definitely expecting him to show up in Endgame. But what we didn't expect was how much the public took to him. Kids were even trying to take selfies with Professor Hulk, which was honestly surprising considering how imposing he is. During Spider-Man Homecoming, we even heard students speaking ill of Bruce Banner and the Hulk, but now it seems like they can't get enough of the guy. Kids these days and their fickle superhero loyalties. A large number of Endgame theories had to do with Loki, and it's not hard to see why. He always seems to have a trick or 20 up his sleeve. He's constantly coming back to life, and the way he supposedly perished in Infinity War was just strange. It definitely seemed like he was up to something. But what? How would he survive and continue his journey in the MCU after being throttled by Thanos? apparently by just disappearing? When Tony Stark and Scott Lang try to retrieve the Tesseract, Loki gets a hold of it and immediately vanishes, never to be seen again. While this was frustrating, because where the heck is he, it also gave us hope that he's still out there somewhere. And now we desperately need to know where. It's weird that Loki just kind of vanished during the movie. It's clear that Marvel Studios is making an effort to become more inclusive, and we're definitely here for it. Movies like Black Panther and Captain Marvel broke down superhero stereotypes and were massive successes at the box office. And it seems like Marvel isn't stopping there, and is continuing their efforts to be a more inclusive cinematic universe. You might have noticed that they combined a big cameo with a historic Marvel moment. There was finally an open and confirmed gay character in a Marvel movie, and no, it wasn't Steve Rogers and Bucky. Sorry, not sorry to the legions of fans hoping for that to happen. During Steve Rogers' support group meeting, we saw Endgame director Joe Russo telling a story of a date he went on with another man. Now, it was a mild moment, but Joe believes representation is really important. He chose to play the part himself, in order to show the audience that he's invested in bringing more diversity to the MCU. During Infinity War, we here at CBR, along with pretty much everyone else in the universe, loved seeing Thor team up with Rocket and Groot. They made such a great little group, and we were glad to see the friendship between Thor and Rocket grow in Endgame. Of course, Groot couldn't really participate, what with being dusted and all, but we assume he was there in spirit. We had a lot of predictions for what would happen to Thor once Endgame was over, and most of them involved him rebuilding Asgard. But Thor decided his birthright was no big deal, and he'd rather hop on a spaceship and fly out to parts unknown with his new pals and also Star-Lord. Asgardians of the Galaxy is the amazing new concept we didn't know we needed until we saw it on the big screen. The rules of Asgardian leadership are honestly almost as confusing as those involving time travel. During the first Thor movie, Odin was totally ready to hand the throne over to Thor, who was clearly nowhere near ready to be king. Despite Loki being brilliant, clever, and desperately wanting the throne, Odin wouldn't even entertain the idea that anyone but Thor should rule. And it seemed like Thor was finally ready to take on the role of King of Asgard by the end of Thor Ragnarok, and we thought that would be a big part of Endgame and beyond. Only it totally wasn't. Not only did Thor take off on a spaceship, but he just transferred the ultimate power of Asgard to Valkyrie with a firm handshake. Is that how it's done? It was a strange and frankly anticlimactic moment in an otherwise very exciting movie. Howard Stark was a brilliant man who was good at a great many things, like making weapons, making money, and making enemies. But we know he definitely struggled with being a father, and who didn't feel a pain in their heart when Tony revealed his father had never said "I love you." Seriously, that's even more tragic than when Peter Parker thought Tony was trying to hug him when he was really just opening the car door. We weren't expecting to see Howard Stark again, and definitely not in such a casual manner. We saw a man rushing home to his pregnant wife with two things all women love: flowers and sauerkraut. It was a surprisingly sweet meeting between a father and the grown-up future version of his son. Tony even got to hear his father say he loves him in a weird time travel roundabout way. Way back when we were still piecing together rudimentary Endgame information, an interview with Gwyneth Paltrow popped up. During the interview, she talked about Endgame and mentioned that Tony Stark and Pepper Potts had a child. In the beginning of Infinity War, Tony did mention he had a dream Pepper was pregnant, so this seemed to coincide with what was going on in the MCU. However, many fans assumed it was a classic case of Marvel Studios' misdirection and didn't look too closely into the idea. But it turns out that Mark Ruffalo and Tom Holland aren't the only members of the Marvel spoiler squad, because Tony and Pepper do have an adorable little daughter named Morgan. We thought the only young kid in Tony's life was going to be Peter Parker, but it turns out Paltrow was telling the truth. Everyone knows that a Marvel movie isn't really over until the final credit scene rolls. Of course, there are always those reckless renegades who rush out of the theater the moment the movie's done without a care in the world, but you know we're sticking around for the post-credit scene. Except this time we were left waiting and waiting. We're not saying that we stayed in the theater until the lights went out and we were left staring into the void, but yeah, that's exactly what happened. On the precipice of Phase 4 and the conclusion of so many MCU storylines, it seemed unfathomable to think we wouldn't get at least one bonus scene. Instead, we hear some music playing, and while some viewers claim to have heard sound effects which symbolize a variety of things, these are unconfirmed. At least we can say the surprises didn't stop when the movie did. We know you can't resist making predictions about upcoming Marvel movies. Did you see any of these moments coming? Or were there any others you were totally blindsided by? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below, and then click on that subscribe button for the latest and greatest videos from CBR. Bye for now.